In this video, I am going to walk you through writing equations from word problems. And this is a topic that a lot of students are, I don't know if I should say afraid, but kind of because you're intimidated by the word problems. But most of the time you do better on these anyways. First off, there is a 5-step process that we follow. And sometimes you might not do all of them, especially the first one. But there is a 5-step process whenever we look at solving equations from a word problem. So first thing, and this is one that you might not do every time, and that is to sketch a picture. So in the ones that we're looking at today, there isn't anything too bad, but we're going to get to word problems through the year where you're going to want to make a little sketch so you can see what it is that you're trying to do. But again, that might not be something that you do on the questions that we're working on today. The next thing that you're going to do is to define a variable. And all that means is that you need to say A is standing for apples, whatever. So that's what that means. So pick a variable. If you want to use X every time, that's fine. A lot of times when we do equations, we will go ahead and choose the variable based on what we're looking for, but as long as you define it, it doesn't matter. All right, next thing we're going to do is write the equation. And sometimes this is the hardest part. So that's what we're going to work on today more than anything. The fourth thing you're going to do is solve the equation, and the steps to solving are the steps that you've been doing for years. And then the last one is to make sure that you answer the question. Sometimes the question might not be just the value of the variable. So sometimes finding X isn't the answer. It might be taking that and then filling it back in. And that's especially true when we work in geometry. All right, so those are the 5 steps. And you can always check your answer as well by going back through the question and making sure that it works. That's important also. All right, so here we go. For example 1, I'm going to say that 3 consecutive integers add up to, we'll do 159. So find the 3 numbers. So find the 3 numbers. All right, so first thing, sketch a picture. I don't necessarily know that we need to sketch a picture, but we do need to definitely think about how we're going to define the variable. So in some ways, I am going to do a little bit of a sketch out here. So I'm looking for 3 numbers that when I add them together are going to equal 159. So this is kind of my basis of what I'm doing. Now, consecutive is an important part. Integers also. Integers tells me that my answer should not be a fraction or a decimal. Consecutive, though, we need to make sure you understand that consecutive numbers are numbers that are right in a row. Okay, so for example, 3, 4, 5 are 3 consecutive integers. All right, so I'm going to start off with that I need 3 numbers. So I'm going to say first number, second number, and third number. So right now what I'm doing is working on defining the variable. Now there's nothing really standing out in here. I'm definitely not going to use the letter I, so I'm thinking I'm just going to go ahead and use the variable X. But I have 3 consecutive numbers. And your first thought might be to use X, Y, Z. But you don't know how to solve an equation with different variables. So the variable has to be the same. So I'm going to start off and say that the first number is X. That's a pretty simple way to start. All right, if the numbers have to be consecutive, and let's just say my first number is 3, the next number would be 4. So the way to represent 4, which is my second number, with a variable would be x plus 1. Because no matter what number I fill in for x, the number immediately after it is going to be 1 more. So it would make sense then that the third number would have to be x plus 2. All right, so if I fill in x with any number, the number immediately after it is going to be 1 more, and the number after that is going to be 2 more than that first number. All right, so here's my setup. So now, if I kind of go back to what I sketched over here, my equation should be the first number plus the second number plus the third number. So the first number plus the second number plus the third number. And it's going to add up to 159. All right, so if I add all these up, I get 3x plus 3 equals 159. And so now I'm just solving. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. And now divide both sides by 3. And I get that x is 52. Well, that's not the answer to the question. That's the solution for x. So now I need to go back and answer the question. So the three numbers are 52, 53, and 54. And if I added those up, they would add up to 159. So that is our answer. All right, so just to kind of recap what we did, first thing we kind of sketched was over here, so that was step 1. This is defining the variable, which is step 2. We wrote the equation over here, we solved it right here, and then we answered the problem or the question in step 5. All right, now before we move on to our next example, I want to help you get set up with other possible consecutive questions. All right, so let's say that, let me fix this here. All right, what happens if the problem asks for consecutive even numbers? All right, well, let's say, again, let's say we have 3 numbers, but this time they have to be consecutive even numbers. All right, well, if we think for a second, consecutive even numbers, that would be 2, 4, 6. So if we always start with our first number as our variable x or n, whatever variable you want to use, if the numbers have to be even, adding 1 isn't going to work. So in this situation, we would have to add 2 to get to the next even number and add 4 to get to the even number after that. So to get from there to there, we have to add 2, but to get from there to there, we have to add 4. Okay, so you might need to think about that for a few minutes. Okay, let's think. What if the question asked for consecutive odd numbers? All right, so let's think about this. Let's do 3, 5, 7 would be consecutive odd numbers. So if we started off with this as our x, the next odd number is still plus 2. And the odd number after that one would be plus 4. So consecutive even and consecutive odd are both done the same way, which means that you have to add 2 to get from one even number to the next, but you have to do the same thing if the numbers are odd. All right, let's go on to example 2. So example 2 is a question I get asked all the time. All right, so for example 2, all right, let's say that you want, let's say you want an 80 in Algebra 1. All right, so far, your scores are, let's say 93, 75, 84, and let's do 78. So that's what you have so far. So, what do you need to get? So what do you need to get on your next test? On your next test to have an 80. I get asked this question all the time. All right, so the situation is you want to have an 80 in algebra. So that's an average. Your scores are 93, 75, 84, and 78. So what do you need to get on your next test to have an 80? So this is an average question. Okay, so basically what we're doing is we're being asked to find the average. So this is an average problem. All right, because I'll refer to that as we go through the unit. That's the average problem. All right, so first let's think about how you find an average. So in order to find an average, I would add these numbers up and divide by the number of numbers that there are. Okay, well, I don't know what my score is on the next test, but I know it's going to be my 5th test. So I'm going to say the 5th test is going to be my X, because that's my unknown. I don't know what I'm getting on my test. All right, so if this is my 5th test grade, then let's find the average. So to find the average, I need to add 93, 75, 84, 78, and the X. It's not going to do me any good to average these numbers because that's not going to include my test. So I need to average these numbers because that's going to include my test score. And then I would divide by 5 because there's 5 tests here. And I know that I want this to equal an 80. So there's my equation. So I'm not averaging those 4 scores because that's not what I want. I want an 80 after I take my 5th test. So I need to average 5 scores together, one of them unknown, divide by 5, and that's going to give me an 80. All right, now, to solve this, you guys learned how to do this, but I just want to make sure that you understand why this makes perfect sense. If we ignore this for just a second and ignore this for just a second, this number divided by 5 has to equal 80. So what number divided by 5 is going to equal 80? Well, we get that by multiplying both sides by 5. We'll cancel out this 5, which makes perfect sense because this right here has to be worth 400 points in order for me to get an 80. So multiply both sides by 5. That tells me that my scores have to add up to 400 points because 400 divided by 5 will give me an 80. So now if I add these up, so let's see, so that's 12 and 8, so that's 20. And then 7, 7, so that's 4, 28, 9, so I'm getting 330. So 330 plus the missing number that I don't know yet has to add up to 400 points. So clearly I need to get a 70. So I need to go back and answer the question. You need to get 70%. All right, so if you need to, go back through that again. Okay, other problems that we might be doing would be things like just general ones where you're just translating maybe something like 3 times a number plus 9 is equal to 71. So a lot of other questions are more general. There's also like questions with rectangles, which we did in the last unit. So just for an example, this would be one where I would draw it. So if I had a rectangle and I know that the width is 7 less than the length. So I'm going to start with the length and I know that the width is 7 less. So that's one where I would sketch a picture. And then from that, you could continue on. You could find the perimeter or find the area and so on. All right, I think that gives you a good head start on the equations. As always, go back and rewatch them if you need to, and particularly watch for the consecutive questions, making sure you set those up correctly, and then the area questions. The average questions. All right, good luck.